All right. Welcome into It's Not Just Talking. I'm Vince Quinn. And on this episode, we're going to dive into books, something that I've always been fascinated with, the idea of getting a podcast and turning it into a book. And what does that process look like? So joining us today is Tina Dietz. Now, Tina is the CEO and founder of Twin Flame Studios, where she's produced more than 500 audiobooks and podcast to book projects. This is award winners. This is bestsellers. This is titles that are featured on things like ABC, Forbes, NPR, The Wall Street Journal, and now she's here on It's Not Just Talking. Here's our conversation. All right, so Tina, you help people turn podcasts into books. And as somebody who has a podcast and talking to people with podcasts and just obsessed with podcasts, why should people consider turning their podcast into a book?
Many, many reasons, Vince. I mean, it's part of the arc of being somebody who is in business or in the business of wanting to develop a platform. It's becoming an author is, at least in this day and age, kind of an inevitable conclusion or an inevitable part of the whole process of building a multi-stage, multimedia platform. And podcasters are in a huge advantageous position compared to a lot of other people because your podcast is a body of work. So we always talk about in podcasting, I've launched many podcasts. I used to be a podcast producer myself, building authority and building an audience and building this and building that. Well, having a book is a way to create almost like this, what I call a virtuous cycle. It's like a Mobius strip of audio content to publishing. And every time we do it, it gets bigger and bigger. So yeah, we've got a lot. We could pick this apart a lot of different ways.
Yeah, it's honestly, I'm so glad that we get to do this because just very selfishly, I have thought about, it's like, I should have a book at some point. Like, and I've started to begin the process in my head of like, someday when I do this, what does that look like? And on some level, and let me ask you this, because I think it's an important question, is if I want to begin this process of, I haven't considered a book, and now I'm going to start thinking about it. I mean, what should I be doing with my podcast to make sure that the content I'm producing is worthy of a book?
Ooh, the book-worthy conversation. Yeah, it's very important. So one of the challenges for podcasters who are experienced is that you've got all of this content that you've created, and it's very challenging to hold it in your head all at once. And we're so used to speaking and talking about different things that there's this old saying that I love, a guy named Hugh MacLeod, who was one of the very popular bloggers back when blogs, pre-podcast days. And he said, you can't see the label of the jar you're in. And I carry that with me all the time because this is what happens when you are a content creator of any kind, particularly a podcaster with long form content, is that you can't possibly understand everything that you've done. So you first have to, if you're experienced, start to look at the themes that you've created. What are the recurring things that you talk about? What are the pillars? What are the values that are really important to you so that you can start to build upon those and even tighten those up in a way that makes your body of work more and more defined over time. And book content really needs to be a slice of your body of work. It doesn't have to be the entire body of work. It can be a slice of this body of work that's based on the themes that are already present. On the other hand, if you are just starting to podcast, you have an opportunity to take either the work you've already been doing or the work that you want to do and start to create better content based on a deeper strategy. Because so many folks, I mean, you and I know from being in podcasting, we're just like, well, let me just get behind the mic and, my friends think I'm funny. Let me just talk. And, right?
Yep.
And there's a big difference between having a show that works and having great dinner or bar conversation. It's not the same thing. So, and some podcasts aren't geared towards books, kind of a morning drive time show, probably not going to make a book out of that. But anything that really has recurring themes is something we want to take a look at to go deeper with and see if it's going to work.
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the beautiful things about when you're doing this, especially from a professional standpoint, because I think the more that you spend time doing all of this content, the more time you spend thinking about your business, naturally those things refine and do get tighter and do get clearer. And you're developing frameworks and you have all this terminology and you're developing your process. Like when all of that comes together, I think you naturally start relaying this like mastery of your space.
That's right.
Right. And so like when it gets to that point, then where you spend all of this time talking about it, writing about it, thinking about it, and you get to this chance to go look back and go, oh my God, I have 100 episodes, or I've been doing this for so many years. It's going to be easy to plan 100 episodes as I get started. Like that expertise, and you tell me, but like, I would figure as you're approaching this from a book standpoint, you can kind of get a feeling for the people who have like that true grasp of exactly what their message is and exactly their audience and the success stories and all the things around it. Like it's a more complete picture, right?
It is a more complete picture, but the beautiful thing is you don't have to have a complete picture. It's never complete, right? A body of work is never complete. There's always, there might be a hub, but then there's spokes off of that hub, or it's this winding path that goes off into many different branches. So we need a podcast. When we're working with podcasters to do a book, we look for a minimum of 50 episodes and at least 20 minutes each. And that usually indicates around a certain set of themes, enough meat that we can at least get a first book underway and get something going that's deeply meaningful. Because I've been in publishing for a long time on the audiobook side of the house, and I also have been running an industry group in the publishing world for 4 years that has about 200 publishing professionals in it. And what we've seen over the last number of years in the world of publishing in general is that readers want different things than they did 5 or 10 years ago because we have so many different ways of accessing content. So the books that people want now, you don't have to have a giant framework book as your first book in the nonfiction space. People want things that are consumable. They want intimate. They want reflective. They want a book that feels like a friend. And podcasts are perfect for that.
And what's so fascinating that you're touching on a bit here is just how books have evolved strategically, right? Like it's gone on. So from before it was, okay, well, you have to have this big major work that's produced through this, a big publishing house, and it's going to be a national book tour, and you need an agent.
Boy.
Like all the, and now, right? Now it's just, hey, I've plenty of people who self-publish and all these different, there's so many ways to go about it now, and the intentions are different. So what are the ways just that you've seen people, especially from that business standpoint, how they've used books strategically for their business once they made it?
Well, this is good stuff. I can give you a couple examples of what's happening right now with some of our author audiences. We have a book that just released recently on the beginning of September 2025. And these folks have a podcast, 300 episodes, beautiful podcast called Responder Resilience. It is 2 mental health professionals and a retired fire captain who have been having conversations with, for, and about first responders for years. And they have an incredible audience. They have a beautiful network of people and guests that they've had on the show. They have never done any, here's the word in podcasting, I hate saying, but it's the way to say it, monetized anything. But I happen to have known this host for years, and I approached him about producing a book in our first cohort of authors. And we weren't exactly sure what type of book we were going to create. It could have gone a bunch of different ways. It could have been inspirational stories, hero stories. It could have been for leadership on how to be a better leader and manager in the first responder space. But where we landed was a guide for mental health professionals on how to better work with first responders, because that book does not exist until now. So these folks have a body of work they didn't even know they were creating to actually create a new category. And we do assisted self-publishing because we want our authors to own their rights. We want them to own their royalties. We want to be able to guide them. Will we help folks have resources to pitch to traditional publishing? Yes. But traditional publishing, quite honestly, most of the time in my mind, is a fairly broken business model that does not help most authors. Hybrid publishing and assisted self-publishing, when it's done well, really helps people benefit from their books far, far more. So these folks now are speaking at conferences. They are developing courses. They are able to write grants. They're doing all this stuff to be able to help more first responders get the help they need from our very fraught mental health system in a better way. So, and they ended up in the first 4 days on number 1 in 2 Amazon categories with no marketing budget, with no marketing people, and not even a big push, because they just called upon their audience and their guests to participate. And why wouldn't these folks want to participate in this beautiful thing? So that's the glorious thing about being a podcaster in this space, is you already have audience, you already have fans, you've already got community.
Yeah, and to be able to do that, because what you touch on there is this idea of there's 15 different books that could have been written from this show and the kinds of content that they're covering. And so what you're able to do is choose something that you think is going to be high impact and resonate and is natural to the show, and it's something they've already discussed at length. And you can always go back to those other things. People having this idea of, hey, I need to do everything at once. I need to cover everything. It needs to be the biggest thing. It's the only book. There's no reason you can't have a series of books about different things. For example, and you know this, like, the not just physical books, but audio books, and like something we can touch on. But
Sure.
Alex Hormozy, one of the biggest names out there, I did an episode about him recently because he not only has books that are specific things like generating leads, and in this case, he's got a new book about money models, but he's got physical books, he's got audio books,
That's right.
and he's actually even put the audiobook on his podcast feed as
Yes.
episodes of the show. And you see all of that come together, and it's like, okay, well, this guy has immense expertise about business building. He knows it in and out. It's all mostly sales, but when you're providing that level of detail, it's impossible to fit everything in one box. You can't do it, right?
No, you can't.
So that's what's so exciting about all of it. And like you said, being able to find that truly distilled, unique thing that allows you to resonate people, which is authentic to you. You've already spoken about it, and you're just presenting it in a new way.
Yeah, completely. It's, what we have another client who is very prominent in the podcasting space. Her show is called Salad with a Side of Fries. 500 episodes. Jen Trepic, she's tremendous, and she's one of the co-founders of the Podcast Professionals Association, like big advocate for the industry. And one of the things we had to do was to parse her podcast episodes so that we weren't cannibalizing her content for future books. Like, what was going to get her to a point where this was going to be a starting point for more books down the road, and still have enough content to be able to do things, later on. So that's, it's a really interesting puzzle to create as we go along with this different content. And then we have newer podcasters, like the folks from The Loud Quiet, Rick and Clancy, who also had a first category creating podcast, which is about parenting as an empty nester. And I'm just recently come into this place as a parent myself. So when I met these folks at PodFest last year, we were resonating on a very personal level as well. But they only had, 50, 60 episodes when we met. But they had gone through such a beautiful journey in this almost journalistic way. We were able to tell a linear story over time about this experience that they've been having to a population who's not being served. There are no parenting guides out there for folks who are in midlife, who are empty nesters or in the sandwich generation, taking care of parents and still having kids who are young adults.
Wow. So
Yeah.
that's okay. So that's pretty incredible. And I mean, to be able to find these people, connect with these people, sort everything out, distill it into a book, and then be able to get the word out. I mean, what are some, because knowing that you're in such a cool space because podcasting and books.
Yes.
And that's a beautiful place to be because they tie together perfectly, and hence your business. But when it comes to the idea of getting the word out, then I mean, how do these things work together now that you've got the book and you have the show? Like, what are the kinds of benefits that you see once those things are actually published and live and working together?
Well, we like to say these books are books that open doors. So podcast opens doors for us because we become part of the media. And we're able to, particularly in a guest-facing show like this one, You can have conversations while you're expanding your network, your colleagues, your resources, all at the same time. It's one of the things that I love about podcasting and always have since God, it's been more than a decade I've been in podcasting. And because you can have this relationship that is hard to do over email or trying to reach out to someone to say, hey, let's have a virtual coffee or something like that. And people are like, well, why? I'm busy. But if you have an audience, if you have matching audiences that you can connect around, it gives us enough of an excuse to spend the time to develop a relationship where then we're colleagues. And this is what happens a lot in the podcast to book arc is now these podcasters have a growing community of their listeners, potentially of their guests and of their colleagues. And so when you put all of those audiences together, you can do things like get testimonials for your book in advance. They're called advance praise. And that can be in your industry, which really helps raise the cachet of the book. You can have launch parties that aren't boring because they're full of people who actually like to talk and have conversations with each other and who are willing to support each other in community. Podcasting, I was the lead interviewer for a podcasting documentary called The Messengers and was interviewed about 50 different podcasters. And across the board, none of them knew each other. The word that kept coming up was intimacy. Podcasting is intimate. And we're developing relationships with people just by our voices in their ears. So when we have a podcast then that we have a book and we talk about it on the show, it's low-hanging fruit for people to start to work with us. It's low-hanging fruit for people to come further into our world. So host-read ads on the show, absolutely. Book ads on Amazon, because you can then use the Amazon infrastructure to help promote your podcast, because now you have a book about it. Opening up doors for speaking. You're definitely more likely to be accepted as a speaker if you have a podcast and a book at the same time. So you've got gravitas, and then you have, audio experience as a speaker. So if you are looking to get into more paid speaking, and you haven't been on a bunch of live stages, if you have a book and a podcast, that's going to put you further along and maybe cut out some of that learning curve. So those are a few things. But in terms of marketing, your podcast, again, is going to be a conduit into having more book sales. And then your book sales are a conduit in you getting more listeners.
So just for the scope of like an actual book creation, we'll start with physical books. What is the range of size? How many pages for a book that you typically create, big end, small end?
We're creating books that have a particular DNA. And that DNA means they need to be consumable, they need to feel intimate, and they need to be content that people want to go back to again and again. So the type of book that, so we did a lot of research before we started creating these books about what books tend to endure over time. And books like The War of Art, The Four Agreements, a little bit further out, they're a little bit longer than we tend to create, are books like The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People and Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic. But there are tons and tons of books out there that are this reflective, not overly prescriptive how-to type of book that allow you to feel like you are in the world of the author and the author is in your world too. So I call this reflective nonfiction. And so those are the books we're trying to create, and they tend to be in the 30 to 40,000 word range because that allows us to have enough to have a beautiful spine for people to read on a plane ride, for people to fit in their bag. They actually will finish reading those books. If you get into a giant framework book that takes a ton of time, outrageous amounts of money to create, there's so much more to it than meets the eye. Those books are wonderful, but I don't recommend them for a first book because having been in publishing for as long as I have, I see people spend anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000 on their first book, and then they wish they hadn't. So these books are like almost like a safer bet to really build the engine so that when you want to build a framework book down the road, you've already got an audience who's hungry for it.
It's interesting. I mean, for that perspective of it, I love Atomic Habits. I read Atomic Habits, and I thought that was a beautiful book in that same sense because it's very profound and it is reflective, and it's something you can keep going back to, and it's just easy to read.
Yeah, it's a great example.
Right, like from that idea of the intimacy of it, I think that's one of the beautiful things about podcasting is it's a casual conversation. You can understand people like that. They don't talk in big flowery terms, and so it's easy to build that relationship because you feel like you are actually talking to somebody. And when you can have a book that comes across that same way, I mean, does it help to have all of the diction, if you will? I mean, you've got like all of these word choices from these people. I feel like you can get a great sense of what their voice is at the same time when you're capturing a book.
Absolutely. Yeah, you nailed it. We do something we call a voice print, where we actually pull out the characteristics of somebody's voice and analyze it in a way that allows them to build upon their strengths down the road in the future, and also allows us to make sure that the book is written in that voice. And this is so great because when somebody sits down to write on their own, I love the sound of my own voice. This is not news to anybody who knows me. Right? But I'm a good writer, but the way I write tends to be far less personable and tends to be far more either academic or even as a little bit stiff because I'm more natural of a speaker than I am of a writer. And this is a major issue for people writing books. But having the audio content alleviates all that because we're able to get people's natural vocal patterns, but then massage it and make sure that it actually is language that should be in a book that elevates them while still being 100% authentic to who they are.
Yeah, it's a hard thing. I think it's easy to lose your voice in other platforms. I mean, I know that just from the idea of talking in a corporate setting, in a business setting, things can get really tight. And you start using jargon that you would never say in your life. And you're like, why did I just use that? What was that?
Did I just say circle back and drill down in the same sentence? What just happened? Yeah.
What's wrong with me? So yeah, you go through this weird transformation because it doesn't feel natural. And that's why I've like personally really embraced podcasting so much as this beautiful marketing tool because I have written in the past, like it was fine, but it's so much easier to do it when I've spoken about it. And now I have words on the issue and I can use my simplistic language to go and express that thought that feels like me. That's the goal, right? I think that's the fear that people have to do these kinds of things with its social media posts or podcasting or writing a book or doing a newsletter, like anything. It's just, I don't feel like myself. I don't sound like myself. And so I don't want to do it.
Yeah. That path to being ourselves, becoming more of who we are, not masking who we are, but becoming more of who we are is always it's a lifelong process. It's absolutely a lifelong process. And I've been an entrepreneur for decades and decades and decades. And it's one of the biggest lessons that you continue to learn as you go is that you don't want to come up with like a persona that is just a mask in front of everybody because it's exhausting to do that and it's ineffective. The more you become yourself, the more success you tend to gather to you because then you're aligned correctly with these other audiences, with these ideas, with things that you can sustain over time because it takes a lot of freaking energy.
It's exhausting. And this is all, while you're running a business to come up with all of these different things to say and get it out in a way that makes sense and to think about these big picture projects, because when you're doing your marketing and your podcasting and all that stuff, newsletters, it's not like you are going to necessarily hit on the exact same subtopic for 10 straight weeks to build out the chapters of that book. Like, you know what I mean? Like you're all
true.
scattered. Yeah. It's 1 week is this, another week is that. Like you're bouncing around areas of the business and that is exhausting. If you're looking for more ways to grow your business through podcasting, sign up for the SBX newsletter. The link is right here in the show notes, and each week in your inbox, you're going to get tips, opinions, strategies, all the things that we talk about here on the show in your inbox. The SBX newsletter right here in the show notes. So, Tina, with all of this, I mean, this is part of why I wanted to have you on the show, this ability to look at this like large scale of work that people have and all these different topics and subtopics. And what are these themes for a book? And how do we put it all together? What are 7 themes for 7 books? And which is the best one? Like,
Exactly.
It's such a great place to be. And one of the things I think is interesting and not discussed much, but audiobooks specifically, because I've heard a ton about regular books and printing everything PDFs and whatever, but audiobooks, why should people consider audiobooks and how big of a difference is it from a regular book?
Ooh, well, audiobooks are our bread and butter. We've been producing audiobooks for 10 years, and we've had more than 500 titles, and we produce now about 120 audiobooks a year, and we've always specialized in nonfiction. So audiobooks are a really special place in the market because a lot of people don't realize that they outsell ebooks 3 to 1, and they have for quite a long time. They're also a multi-billion-dollar industry worldwide. They're over $1 billion just in America and the US alone. And the average reader in the US reads about a book a year. The average audiobook listener listens to 12 audiobooks a year. So people who love audiobooks consume them like potato chips. And in a mobile world, because audiobooks typically are listened to on a mobile format, we're commuting, we're at the gym, we're on a walk, we're waiting for our kids, we're doing whatever. Audio is the most consumable form of audio, of media. You can listen when you can't read, you can listen when you can't watch. So podcasts and audiobooks are in the same sphere in terms of consumability. It's just what people's personal preferences are. It's quite fascinating. So yeah, audiobooks have also been on the rise. They've had a double-digit growth every year on year for almost 15 years now, with the
Wow.
exception of 1 year. And some of those years of growth have been as high as 23-24% year over year for sales.
That's
Yeah.
incredible. I mean, and it makes so much sense when you think about, like you mentioned earlier, blogs to podcasting, right? Like that leap and that change in how people
Yeah.
consume.
Oh, yes.
It's like same thing. But it's so fascinating because I got to tell you, I almost never hear anybody, with all the ways you get spammed and advertised to on LinkedIn or Instagram or anything else, everybody's always has books and it's download the book. But you don't hear people, maybe it's me. I don't see audiobooks enough, especially in the business space of, hey, here is this audiobook and go check it out. Is that me? Is that a me problem? Like, clearly it's everywhere, it sounds like.
People don't tend to lead with audiobooks. Audiobooks tend to be at the end of the book creation process because of the way the publishing industry is set up. It is almost impossible to publish audio first. Because it is not then considered an audiobook, it's considered an audio program. And this is an industry problem. It's very hard to publish an audiobook first. And because, especially in the digital space, the identifier for a book, which is called an ISBN, it'll be on the back of your barcode of any book you buy in a physical format, you will, that digital portion of the audiobook is associated with that ISBN for the book. So getting an ISBN for your audiobook up front is a bit of a different animal. They get marketed differently, they get displayed differently. So it can be really challenging for authors to go audio first. And that's one of the things that we're trying to change in the market, because audiobooks are incredibly popular. They're everywhere, but they're not the first format that you get when you get a book.
Tina, I knew we'd have a great conversation, and this has just been phenomenal stuff. So thank you for your time, for walking us through everything here with the whole book process and the value. So for people who want to connect with you, what's the best way to keep up with you?
You can absolutely find us very easily at twinflamesstudios.com. Twin Flames Studios is a multi-studio brand. We have our VoiceCraft audiobooks and we have our podcast to book conversions. And you can find out all that information there at twinflamesstudios.com. Thank you so much.
All right, and that's the show. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.